Hey guys, Mr. Davis here. If you recall, back in Unit 1, we talked about how Earth is a closed system. The only thing that's coming in is energy from the sun. And we talked a little bit about that with Chapter 4, how we said that the sun is the basis for all ecosystems. It provides food for the producers, which are then eaten by the consumers. Okay, well, that's great to talk about the sun. What about the rest of the stuff? Because we're not made up of pure energy. We're made of matter, of physical material. So how does that physical material, which we said is a closed system on Earth, get recycled? So what we're going to talk about in this chapter is going to be the different ways that the Earth recycles some key elements. The first one we'll start with is the carbon cycle, and we'll go from there. So let's go ahead and take a look at the different cycles that help matter get recycled on Earth. All right, so this is a concept called the biogeochemical cycle. And here's the goal for what we're going to talk about. We are in this video going to identify the role of the carbon in the ecosystem. We're going to describe the short and long-term processes of the carbon cycle, and we're going to identify some ways that humans are affecting the carbon cycle. The biogeochemical cycles are the different cycles that are used to move this matter through the ecosystem. So you have the carbon cycle, the phosphorus cycle, the nitrogen cycle, the water cycle, and then kind of the oxygen cycle. That's kind of an interesting one there. And we'll talk about the oxygen a little bit while we talk about carbon. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off with the carbon cycle, and we're going to use that as a framework for how Earth recycles matter. So this is our overview of the carbon cycle, and we'll see it again, don't worry. You start off for all of these with one of the larger reservoirs of carbon, of available carbon, I should say. This is where carbon is most readily available to be taken into the living organisms, and that's atmospheric carbon dioxide. Atmospheric carbon dioxide, or CO2, is taken in by plants in the process of photosynthesis, and then it is transferred to everything else when they eat plants or eat something that ate plants. That material can be then deposited into different reservoirs. So remember, a reservoir is a place like, a lake that holds water. Well, in this case, a reservoir is somewhere that holds carbon. So one good example of this is limestone. You wouldn't think of limestone as having carbon in it because we think, oh, carbon dioxide, or carbon as in carbohydrates in food, or carbon fuel like coal and oil. Well, limestone is made up of the exoskeletons of organisms that lived in the bottom of the ocean. It's actually calcium carbonate. So it's calcium and carbon together, all right? It's formed when those organisms in the ocean make their shells. So, for example, seashells like clam or mussel shells or things like that, that's actually formed from calcium carbonate. And those shells over time can get crushed down into sand and get compacted and turned into limestone or sandstone. And that can actually hold a lot of carbon in them. And in fact, it's one of the places where a lot of carbon that was moving around the atmosphere millions of years ago has been deposited. Another place is in fossil fuels, and we're going to talk about the formation of those fossil fuels and how this all works. So this right here is just a very simple overview of the carbon cycle. And don't worry, again, I'm going to show you this several times. I will walk you through the steps and we'll go through it. All right. So the first part in the carbon cycle is, how does the carbon go from being in the atmosphere to being in living organisms? And that's why it's a biogeochemical cycle. It goes from a element, oftentimes geological in nature, to a biological component, something in living things. And the way that carbon moves in is through the process of photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is what plants perform. All right, that is how plants take in energy from the sun. They convert that to glucose and oxygen, and then that energy is stored from the sun. So remember, the plants are producers, And producers can convert carbon dioxide in the atmosphere into carbohydrates. That's where that term carbo comes from, because it's carbon based, like glucose. Glucose is a simple sugar. Plants can move those up to more complex sugars like fructose or sucrose as well, but glucose is where they have to go first. They will also produce 6 O2 molecules as a result. So they'll take in 6 carbon dioxide, and they will perform photosynthesis along with 6 waters, and they will produce 1 glucose molecule and 6 oxygen molecules. And that's the basic formula. Well, then consumers like you and me, things that have to eat food to survive, we're going to eat those plants or that glucose. We're going to take that into our body, and we're going to perform a process called cellular respiration, where we will use that glucose and that oxygen, and we're going to release 6 carbon dioxide and 6 waters and gain energy. All right, so the plant takes in energy, produces glucose, we take in the glucose and release the energy, and then release that carbon dioxide and water back into the environment. So during cellular respiration, some of that energy is released as heat into our bodies, and some of that carbon is released back into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. We'll also take some of that carbon and we'll rearrange it and turn it into other stuff, and we'll use that to build the tissues in our body, build fats and lipids and muscle and all kinds of stuff like that. All right, so that is the first part of the carbon cycle, just the simple exchange of atmospheric carbon dioxide to primary producers to consumers. Remember, we are consumers. Then we eat it, we breathe out, and that goes back into the atmosphere to be used by the producers. All right, awesome. Okay, so then let's take a look at some of the other places that carbon can go. So when a number of organisms die, all right, or they're eaten, their bodies and the carbon in their bodies can be released back into the environment and can be reused and recycled in the environment. So the carbon stored in the bodies of organisms as fats and oils and proteins and other molecules can be released into the soil or into the air as that organism is broken down, or if it's scavenged by another organism eats it because it's killed and eaten or whatever, or bodies there and like vultures and stuff like that will eat it. It'll go into those things and continue to cycle through the ecosystem. It'll continue to be used now that it's been taken out of the atmosphere. However, sometimes these molecules will get compressed and packed underground. And there they may form deposits of coal, oil, or natural gas, which are known as fossil fuels. So here's how that happened. Over 300 million years ago, so 300 to 350 million years ago, there were swamps. This is before the dinosaurs. This is when, the most complex life on, land was giant bugs and maybe some small lizards, all right? Many of these plants died in swamps and sank into the mud. And they got buried there, and they never got broken down because the bacteria weren't able to get to them, or nothing was able to eat them. So underwater, hundreds of millions of years ago, they were compacted by dirt and dead plants. This can also include stuff that was on the bottom of the ocean as well. And all of that compaction pressed down on this, and eventually heat and pressure turns it into coal or oil or natural gas. It kind of depends on the circumstances under which they were compressed, water that was present, some of the chemicals that were there in the bodies of those organisms. These are fossil fuels, and these fossil fuels store carbon that was left over, and that carbon was locked up for hundreds of millions of years. So this is not carbon that was just in the atmosphere. When you eat something and you breathe out carbon dioxide, you're just re-releasing carbon that was in the atmosphere a short time ago from that plant that you ate, all right? But this is carbon that's been locked away for 350 million years or more, all right? And as a result, we are affecting the carbon cycle. So when we burn fossil fuels, we release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So when we burn that in a combustion reaction, we take that carbon that's locked up in the ground, we burn it, and it binds with oxygen, and it's released in the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. And we use it for a lot of different stuff. So we'll take crude oil and we'll heat it up, and some of it will turn into refinery gas, which is literally used as fuel. It's like a light gas. It's a version of natural gas, basically. Some of it will turn into gasoline or petrol for cars. Some of it will be used as a chemical for chemical production. You get kerosene, which is a type of jet fuel. You get diesel fuels for diesel engines. And then lastly, you get these heavy fuel oils, which are used for motor oil. They're used to make synthetic oils to lubricate parts and machines. They're even used to make things like asphalt to make the blacktop for the roads. So the problem is, though, the increased level of carbon dioxide is contributing to climate change. See, carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, and what that means is, as this gas is built up in the atmosphere, energy that comes in from the sun gets trapped and insulated close to the surface of the Earth. So it makes the surface of the Earth warmer and warmer and warmer. Too much carbon dioxide corresponds with higher surface temperatures. Carbon dioxide, along with water vapor and other gases, has been shown that it can raise the temperature of our planet. If we look at the geologic history of our planet, we look at ice cores, we look at other data, we can actually look at times and what rocks were present, what plants were present, how far down the ice sheets were, like how far down glacial ice came from the North Pole. And we can see when the Earth was warmer and colder. And what we find is that periods where you had less ice, you had more carbon dioxide, and vice versa. Times when you had more ice, you had less carbon dioxide. So greenhouse gases absorb and re-radiate infrared energy, warming the Earth. And this is the problem. Fundamentally, what's happening is we're taking carbon that has been locked away for millions of years, has not been participating in the system. We're pumping it back into the atmosphere, and as a result, what we're ending up with is higher temperatures than we should be seeing. That is how we're affecting the Earth by affecting the carbon cycle. All right, guys, so let's finish up with a quick review. All right, so in the short term, carbon is removed from the atmosphere by photosynthesis and then returned to the atmosphere by cellular respiration. Plants take in carbon dioxide, that's photosynthesis, convert it to simple sugars, that gets eaten by animals, and then as those animals use that to run their metabolism, as they burn that sugar, as it were, they release carbon dioxide when they breathe out. That's the whole, you breathe in oxygen, you breathe out carbon dioxide. Well, that's the basis of cellular respiration there. Now, more long-term, carbon is stored as either limestone or fossil fuels. And this comes from the bodies of organisms that died millions of years ago, got compacted under the ground, and through geologic processes were turned into either rock as limestone or into oil or coal deposits as carbon deposits, as fossil fuels. All right? Now, the way that humans interact with this is we dig up fossil fuels or other sources of carbon like limestone. We use that, we either burn it for energy and release carbon dioxide into the air, or we use that carbon as limestone. We make things like concrete, which can actually release carbon dioxide as well during its curing process, as the process of making concrete releases a lot of that carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. So those are two big ways that humans interact with it. Now, I do want to note one more that I didn't mention before, but I'm going to mention it now. Another big way that we're having a huge effect on the carbon cycle is through deforestation. By removing trees from the surface of our Earth or removing photosynthetic plants from the oceans, what we're doing is we're reducing the ability of our Earth to take that carbon back in. So at the same time as we're releasing carbon dioxide into the air that hasn't been in the air for millions of years, we're also removing the way that the Earth is able to get that carbon back out of the atmosphere. because trees last for a long time, they are also a way that that carbon cycle is slowed down. It takes the carbon dioxide out of the air. So if you can imagine a giant like redwood tree, which can be 800 years old, that's a tree that took in carbon dioxide 800 years ago, stored that in its body to make its trunk, to make its tissues and its materials, right? And then, if we cut that down, that carbon might get released back in the atmosphere by it burning. Or if that tree burns down, which is even worse, that releases that carbon dioxide all back into the air. So right now, big problem that we've got is a lot of trees have been cut down, so they're not absorbing carbon dioxide. Many of those trees get burned, like you're seeing on the west coast of the United States right now. You've got these big wildfires. Those wildfires are burning through old growth forests, and those are forests that haven't been disturbed in hundreds of years. So some of those trees are releasing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that's been bound up for hundreds and hundreds of years. So these are just a few ways that we are interacting with the carbon cycle. All right, guys? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop there. That's our first video for chapter 5. Tomorrow, or next video, is going to be on the nitrogen cycle. And we'll take a look at the nitrogen, and actually we'll probably add the phosphorus cycle as well, which are two different cycles which demonstrate how nitrogen and phosphorus are moved around on our planet, which are important chemicals or important elements that are needed to make things like DNA, which is, what carries all the information for every living thing on the planet. So, all right, that's where we're going to stop here. You take care, guys. I'll see you soon. Bye.